Freshman orientation to college can be a stressful experience. Meeting new people, signing up for classes, getting your ID, and even moving into the dorms can represent a whirlwind of change. But one thing that isn't usually expected at freshman orientation today is that you would go to the gymnasium, strip naked, and have your photo taken. But for thousands of college goers, especially between the 1940s and the 1970s, that was a normal and expected part of freshman orientation, all in the name of good posture. It is history that deserves to be remembered. Good posture is a concept that has changed over time. Prior to the 1750s, languid slouching and relaxed posture was emphasized in social settings in England, a movement that spread to America. European styles began to change around the same time as an emphasis on stiff backs and restrictive clothing came to define the Victorian era. Early America caught this bug as well, as evidenced by John Adams berating himself for poor posture and what it stood for: poor self-control. Lord Chesterfield's widely published 1775 book, Lord Chesterfield's Advice to His Son on Men and Manners, recommended new standards, advising against odd motions, strange postures, and ungenteel carriage. Good posture became a defining characteristic of a morally upright and successful person. In art, failures and evil men were depicted hunched and bent. An 1817 pamphlet by Emma Parker advised women that posture was becoming an important measure of virtue, and that women's bodies should partake as little as possible in the motion of the limbs. Similar advice was aimed at men, claiming that awkwardness of carriage is very alienating. Manuals on etiquette emphasized posture training in childhood, insisting that children sit erect at all times. Women's fashions emphasized straight backs and stiff posture, with corsets and stiff-laced bodices. Straight, hard-backed furniture encouraged, or even enforced, good posture. Poor posture in women was blamed on excessive letter writing, while others argued that masturbation led to poor posture. There was an insidious side to posture as well. Before Charles Darwin or the concept of evolution, phrenologists argued that Europeans had a particular predilection for posture in their bones and spines, unlike less civilized races of men. In the late 1800s, there was a reaction against the stiff formalness of Victorian etiquette. Rocking chairs, previously relegated to back rooms and used mostly by the elderly, appeared in living rooms. In 1881, one commentator wrote that the new furniture goes a great deal towards civilizing people generally. It seems to us impossible for the human race to be good-natured and good-tempered if forced to sit in a bolt upright position in the extreme corner of a horsehair-covered sofa. It is not surprising that our forefathers were given to atrocities and cruelties when they were brought up to endure such tortures as could be inflicted by the furniture of even 20 years ago. Fashion, too, became less stiff and strict and allowed more freedom for relaxed postures. Depictions into the first decades of the 20th century showed fashionable people slouching, leaning, and reclining. This relaxation of posture standards was accompanied by a reactive backlash. More comfortable furniture, which included newfangled inventions like springs, were seen as a threat to good posture. Critics argued that these comfortable chairs would lead to lounging attitudes and a loss of discipline. Etiquette books abounded and targeted children especially. In 1872, Dr. Dan Newcomb wrote When and How, a child-rearing manual. One panel showed contrasting children. One had healthy and happy children playing outside, while the other had twisted, ugly children sitting indoors with piles of books. The caption read, Which? There is a growing opinion that our physical degradation must find a stopping place, Newcomb wrote. We must act with the same care in rearing our children that we exercise in raising our domestic animals. He impressed that parents needed to make children stand erect as nature made them to stand, and not to stoop and throw their shoulders forward and sink the chest in, thus compressing the lungs until it will not hold air enough for aerating the blood. Dr. D.F. Lincoln blamed schooling, where students lacked enough exercise and slumped while they studied. Lincoln claimed that bad desks were causing 83 to 92% of students to suffer spinal deformations. In Cultivation of the Chest, or The Highest Physical Development of the Human Form, Dr. Edmund Shaftesbury argued that posture improved not only physical and hygienic issues, but had a moral effect on the whole body. Other articles attacked the slanting script taught to children, which forced them to twist to write properly. Illnesses that affect posture, like scoliosis and rickets and lordosis, usually manifest in youth. An 1890 German pediatric dictionary claimed that more than half of children suffered from spinal curvature. Probably the greatest results of fear about the health implications of poor posture was the physical education movement. In 1887, Dr. Edward Hitchcock, first president of the American Association for the Advancement of Physical Education, said, "Let the thought be eminent and predominant with us, that the highest aim of our special work is to develop the most perfect types of men and women in body, soul, and spirit." The American Physical Education Review, founded in 1898, was one of the central publications talking about posture deterioration and possible solutions. Jesse Bancroft formed the American Posture League in 1914, which, among other things, produced many posture wall charts. Though school might be partially to blame for poor posture, it also quickly became the best place to improve posture and identify cases of spinal deformity like scoliosis. School was also an ideal place to teach children good posture in the form of posture tests and education, and not just in elementary schools. Harvard had posture tests as early as 1880, and many other colleges would follow suit. Harvard's program was developed by D.A. Sargent, who created a template of the statistically average American and measured Harvard students in an effort to get students to reach a perfect muscular form. Women's College Vassar began keeping posture and other physical records in 1884. The ideal test was for a patient to stand naked in front of a mirror or have a nude photo taken, and for an expert to comment and offer remedies for poor posture. Between 1885 and 1900, schools tracked thousands of students and their posture at Yale, Wellesley, Oberlin, and the University of Nebraska. The efforts were apparently paying dividends. A 1913 posture crusade worked wonders in Detroit. Each student was given a posture percent, and students with bad posture were labeled Bs and shamed until they could straighten up. A machine called a stereopticon was used, which took shadow pictures of each child that were then discussed with the class. Children were made to strip down to underwear or swimsuits to be assessed. In the 1940s, students were even told that good posture was necessary to win the war. The most intense posture programs took hold in private, East Coast colleges like the Ivy League and the Seven Sisters colleges. In 1921, a meeting of the Eastern Society of College Directors of Physical Education for Women examined the state of posture programs. Bryn Mawr and Cornell offered posture instruction in gymnastics and dancing classes, while Goucher College only urged general exercise. Simmons and Wheaton colleges measured students carefully and even referred cases to surgeons, while Vassar, Barnard, and the University of Pittsburgh conducted tests and offered awards for posture. Many used shadowgraphs, schematographs, and posture tracings in posture education, and Vassar had a robust posture photography program. In 1915, Vassar had invited the American Posture League to examine its students, and by 1915 had created a posture committee. Tag days were held where students tagged anyone not standing or walking correctly. In 1920, they held a posture drive and gave pins to the students who had the best posture. In 1930, a new Vassar PE director even claimed the right to dismiss students if their posture was bad at enrollment. About 1/3 of students were given special assignments to correct their posture at orientation. In 1932, Vassar introduced its Fundamentals course, a required course for freshmen that emphasized posture and included nude photographs and examination. Professor Elizabeth Daniels described the Vassar photography sessions. In your freshman year, you went over to the gym, you changed into an angle robe before entering the booth, shed the robe temporarily while your nude profile and rear views of your body were recorded, put the angel robe back on, and left. A professor would discuss posture deficiencies, and then the photos were committed to the furnace. These posture programs remained in force for decades at some of the top colleges in the country, like Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Wellesley, and Brown. Television personality Dick Cavett described his own experience at Yale in the mid-1950s, where Mr. Cold Hands affixed non-invasive needles to his back. He joked about it in a comedy routine later. Some guys hated it. Some seemed to enjoy it. One guy tried to go through twice. One guy fainted. One guy tried to buy his pictures, and one guy tried to get his retouched. And yet he also recalled that it was awful. Ron Rosenbaum, who wrote an expose in 1995 for the New York Times called The Great Ivy League Nude Posture Photo Scandal, remembered his own photo session, also at Yale, 10 years after Cavett. Entire generations of prominent Americans were subjected to this bizarre ritual. George Bush, Hillary Clinton, Meryl Streep, Bob Woodward and Diane Sawyer, among thousands of others. Among college students, rumors abounded that thousands of the photos had been stolen from one college or another and offered for sale on some Ivy League black market. Washington writer Sally Quinn said, "You always thought when you did it that one day they'd come back to haunt you. That 25 years later, when your husband was running for president, they'd show up in Penthouse." The American obsession with posture had more sinister consequences and uses, however. The photos were used in studies, such as one that used the Harvard photos to determine if smoking made one more manly. In 1992, George Hershey, an art professor at Yale, published a letter in the Times that claimed, "A secret lies hidden in Vassar and Yale nude posture photos." In the 1940s, psychologist William Herbert Sheldon formulated his theory of somatotyping, which categorized humans into three types, which he believed were connected to temperaments and indicated a person's intelligence, morality, and potential. As Rosenbaum put it, Sheldon believed that physique equals destiny. Sheldon's work was inspired or based on earlier work like Ernst Kretschmer's, who also thought he could categorize personality based on body type. There were the ectomorphs, then people who were more intelligent, gentle, but self-conscious. Mesomorphs, muscular, fit individuals who are competitive and extroverted, and endomorphs, short, heavy-set people who are outgoing and laid back, but also lazy and selfish. Sheldon also continued that criminals tended to be mesomorphic. Sheldon began by using 4,000 photos from the University of Chicago. Using body measurements, Sheldon categorized the bodies using a 3-digit number that represented each one of the body types, and, by extension, personality types. While the concept may seem absurd today, at the time the concept that body types and posture were connected to inner traits was more acceptable in the 1940s and connected to the field of eugenics. Sheldon led an Institute for Physique Studies at Columbia. According to Hershey, the photos had nothing to do with posture. That is only what we were told. Sheldon, along with anthropologist E.A. Houghton at Harvard, collected or photographed thousands of people. Sheldon's theories were for a time popular. Writer Aldous Huxley was a particular admirer, as were a number of psychologists and social theorists. His studies were supported, and he appropriated thousands of posture photos to apply to his own research, without the consent of the photographed. The details of how Sheldon got access to many of these photos is somewhat murky. Few of the people involved ever spoke on the subject. It is known he sent his own team to colleges such as Smith College, Mount Holyoke, Swarthmore, Vassar, and Midwestern universities in Iowa, Illinois, and Wisconsin. Sheldon used the photos to produce research, and his Atlas of Men in 1954, which included many nude photos of freshmen from Ivy League schools. In Sheldon's collections, Rosenbaum found 27,000 photographs, about 20,000 of them of men and nearly half from Yale. Hershey accused Sheldon of creating a stud book which could be used to connect the best and brightest when he published his accompanying Atlas of Women. At least some schools were confused about how Sheldon even acquired the photos. Rosenbaum found photos of Vassar classes from 1942 and 1952, and the school wasn't even sure how he got them. Correspondence between Vassar faculty and Sheldon seemed to illustrate how personal relationships helped him collect his photographic collections. Sheldon wrote to Vassar's head physician and explained that to create an atlas of women, he needed between 10,000 and 20,000 photographs to determine satisfactorily the somatotype distributions. It's particularly important to have an unloaded sample. That is to say, when the matter is put on a voluntary or semi-voluntary basis, the validity of the sample is destroyed. Sheldon didn't think he could afford to let women consent, as it would skew the findings. In 1952, a Vassar faculty member wrote to Sheldon that we expect to do physical exams on sophomores during the week of March 20th to 24th. We will be taking our own posture pictures as part of the examination. If you can plan it and think you could fit it into your schedule, we'll be glad to have you use these girls as some of your guinea pigs. Even taking the photos seemed to put strain on young women. An official at Denison University in Ohio refused Sheldon's request to retake photos, as it would create insurmountable psychological problems. One of Sheldon's assistants remembered doing a great deal of work in reading hospital and court records and looking up the medical and social backgrounds of the people photographed. There was, without a doubt, an undercurrent of racism in the work. Hershey accused Sheldon of creating an archive similar to the Nazis' archives that sought to prove racial perfection. Houghton said that somatotype studies would lead to efforts to control and limit the production of inferior and useless organisms. The Harvard Crimson claims that people who knew Sheldon described him as a racist and a Nazi sympathizer, and he believed that Hispanic and African brains stopped maturing earlier than whites. A contemporary researcher, physician Robert Holt, called Sheldon's work a dangerous piece of fascistic pseudoscience. The whole program came apart in 1950, when Sheldon was taking photographs of freshman women at the University of Washington. According to Rosenbaum, one of the women told her parents. And the next day, a battalion of lawyers and university officials stormed Sheldon's lab, seized every photo of a nude woman, convicted the images of shamefulness, and sentenced them to burning. Sheldon's Atlas of Women never appeared, and his research was largely discredited, in part because his assistant, Barbara Heath, denounced his methods as fraudulent and his somatotypes as inaccurate. Sheldon died in 1977, his career in shambles. Posture photos continued to be taken at some universities into the 1960s and 70s until the practice finally faded, and many thousands have been burned or otherwise destroyed, but some are still held in collections, like by the Smithsonian Institution. Despite the best effort of administrators and others, a few have made it to the public to be sold on eBay. Rosenbaum's 1995 article did make some waves and led the Smithsonian Institution to seal their collection and destroy many thousands of those photos. Of course, posture remains an issue in America, but we'll hope for all our sakes that it will no longer require nude photos. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community and locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.